Oh, this meeting's on a web conference call. Click on the link to join. New version of the conference application is available. Click on download. Downloading. Okay, now click on the download to install. Windows is asking permission to install this application. Okay, click on OK. Oh, all right, okay. So type in my name and click to join. Remember those days? Maybe you still use a dial-in conference platform with a 10-digit access code and a 12-digit conference code. But a significant number of conference calls have moved to web clients, and for the first 10 years or so, we had a mishmash of web conferencing services that each had their own applications and media interfaces. And it seemed like they almost always needed to be updated at the start of an important call. I wonder how many hours of productivity they lost with each of these updates. And more likely than not, today you click on a link in your web browser and it asks for permission to use your camera and microphone, and you're added to the conference bridge. It's that simple. Now, thanks to a technology called WebRTC, or Web Real-Time Communications, virtually all web conference services are as simple as click to join. No more plugins, no more applications to install. I'm Alan Percy, your podcast host, and during this episode of Telecom Disruptors, we're going to talk with Erik Lagerway, a long-term friend of mine and one of the early contributors to the technology behind the evolution of client-side multimedia applications and WebRTC. Erik has recently taken a new position as the Vice President of Products at SignalWire and was gracious enough to share some of the background on the journey that led to many of the new web-based communications applications you use today. Well, Erik, thanks for spending a few minutes with us today and sharing some of your story and some of what's been happening in your career through telecommunications. But everything always has a beginning. So let's start at the very beginning for your journey through the telecommunications gauntlet. And how did you get involved in this?
Oh my God! Do you really want to know all the dark and?
Yes, there's always a story behind the story. So let's start with the story behind the story. So what was your first gig in telecommunications?
I'm not sure if I'd call it a gig. I think the first exposure I had to communications was probably from my dad at a very early age. He was a pretty active ham radio enthusiast. And so we spent a lot of time in front of the ham radio talking to people all over the world using amateur radio, so two-way radio. So it was, I think that was probably the earliest memory of global communications for me, and it was obviously free. So I thought that was just really special. My mom and dad both came from Holland, in their 20s, so. For us to be able to get on the radio and talk to anybody all over the world for free, and knowing how expensive it was to pick up the phone, it was I put those two things together, and I think that was probably the impetus. Yeah, exactly. That was the.
No, it's interesting because you're
catalyst.
The third or fourth person has been part of this podcast that started in the exact same way. Is that somehow amateur radio exposure to, like you said, worldwide free communications kind of set a stage for people to be able to say, we all should be able to do this, or it shouldn't be quite so complicated, or I shouldn't have to string long wire antennas over to my neighbor's house to be able to talk to people halfway around the world.
Exactly. And I think in addition to that, my dad was also one of the first guys in Canada, at least, to have a kit computer. And I think he had an IMSI 8080, which it was an old hexadecimally programmed, personal computer. Right. So he was, in between the ham radio and the IMSI 8080 and the teletypes, and I think that's who we can blame for me spending, the majority of my life in voice over IP and IP communications.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like I created a spark. It's somewhere along then, as you came out of university and started looking at careers, and somehow you were able to apply that to an early gig. So where did you actually get going?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So I was working, I was consulting on some web projects early on in kind of like the commercial internet. And I ended up stumbling across a fellow who was messing around with dialogic cards and, H323 stacks. And I said, hey, that's really cool. So I built up a little personal computer with a dialogic card and a 323 stack, and I think it was running Windows NT at the time, which was burdensome. I had to write a script to reboot it every 30 minutes because it would just hang. No. It was so bad. But I think that plus the the net meeting SDK early on, and those types of tools got me interested in it. Again, it was kind of akin to my childhood, and I think that's kind of what made the love come to life for me with regards to IP communications. And I think the big part of that was I had I was just creating this business of my own, and I had this accountant, and he said, this part-time accountant, and he said, hey, this voice over IP stuff, this IP telephony stuff, this is pretty cool. I mean, you should go raise some money and build something. And I'm like, well, I barely got this business together. I don't even understand how I would go about doing that. And he says, well, you should put a little bulletin in the immigration bulletin that those that are interested in immigrating to Canada can sign up for. And I said, okay. So I got my hands on one of these bulletins, and it was basically just a leaflet full of, pizza shops and pizza joints and pet shops, bricks and mortar kind of thing, hair salons and stuff for those that wanted to immigrate to Canada could invest in. And people would put these little ads in there that would allow those that are interested in coming to the country to take a look at what's available. And so I said, yeah, I'll do that. So I took out a little ad in one of these leaflets, and it was like, voice over IP, to change communications forever, toll-free bypass, make free calls anywhere in the world. I had that in there, I think, for one run, and it ran once a quarter. And I was the only tech play in the bulletin. I think that it was pretty obvious.
Yeah.
And I immediately started getting phone calls from these fellas that wanted to immigrate to Canada. And one of them was already in town, and he said, hey, is this real? And I said, yeah, it's real. And he says, well, how soon can I see it? I'm like, well, I can show it to you anytime you like. Are you coming to town? And he says, well, are you in Burnaby? The address shows you in Burnaby. I'm like, yeah, I'm in Burnaby. He says, I'll be there in 15 minutes. I said, okay.
You better have your pitch ready.
So I didn't even know what a pitch was, I think, which was probably the beauty of it. So he showed up at my door, and he was driving a Porsche, and he was looking all the business. So I had a little sign on the front door of this rental house I was in, and the lawn hadn't been cut in weeks, so it was probably about 2.5 feet high. And he walks to the front door, and he looks on the sign, and it has an arrow pointing to the basement. And he comes around to the basement, and this old house that was built in the, I think the 40s, it was all dilapidated, and there was the grass in the backyard again was 3 feet tall. And he comes around to the back door, and he knocks on the door, and I come to the door, and I'm in my shorts, and there's piles of laundry everywhere. And he goes, is this for real? I said, yeah. Yeah, are you Anton? He goes, yeah, I'm Anton. I says, Anton, pleasure to meet you. He goes, yeah. Is this for real? And I said, yeah, it's for real. Okay, well, show me. So I let him into my basement little home office there, and he sat down in front of the computer, and he goes, well, what am I doing? And I says, well, give me a business card. And I hard-coded his telephone number, and then I published this web page, and I says, okay, well, hit that button. So he hits the button, goes to the dialogic card. I'm praying that the NT, that the that the thing doesn't crash halfway through the call.
Right. Yeah, because nothing like a blue screen of death to help a demo.
Right. Exactly. So he his phone rings and he doesn't recognize the number, and he says, "I don't know who this is. I'll be right back." So he wanders off into the backyard amongst all the weeds, and he picks up the phone and he goes, "Anton speaking." I get in front of the computer and I say, "Anton, it's Erik. I'm in the basement."
Yeah.
And he comes back in and he writes me a check for well over 75 grand for early stage seed capital.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, so that was kind of my first foray into not just raising money for a company, but voice over IP in the commercial sense.
Yeah. Well, those early demos, and we've all been through many of them, and I know they were a little rough, but I think people saw the value in especially the toll bypass market. That early toll bypass market was just an obvious place to do arbitrage that made so much sense financially. So it was easy for people to see the value.
Yeah, it was. It became a lot more difficult, actually, pretty early on how to make a business out of, commercializing voice over IP and IP telephony, past just toll bypass. And I think that's where the industry it came out with a big bang, and then it kind of slowed a bit, and then it kind of took off again as people tried to figure out how to make use of this stuff.
I think the applications have matured, and I think one of the things from sifting through your CV, I noticed you get involved in the soft client side of the business, and I think that is important to understand that these, the early PCs, obviously had a sound card or something like that, but it took a lot more than that to actually make reliable soft clients. You want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think probably the what came out of that demo was a company called, it's not really important what it's called. There were a few companies that came out of that, and eventually it led to me understanding that, making, having communications from PC to PC was kind of where it was at. Adding a PSTN interconnect to the mix just allowed you to talk to that legacy world. And I think that that was kind of like the light bulb moment, and created a couple of companies that led to I think a rather large movement in the soft phone space, which I think was perfect timing. Everybody and their dog was looking to figure out how to compete with the likes of Skype, who was just kind of, coming onto the scene in a commercial way. And it was hard to compete with Skype because everything was free. So they were trying to figure out how to, come up with a competitive product that not only could talk free, but I could also talk, how do we make money from this? And I think that was, where the carrier customers that we were talking to saw value in the product that we were building, which was, all soft phone and soft phone SDK.
And I think it's important too that, that the soft phone, I think from a consumer standpoint, even to this day, people don't think of, I'm going to sit down on my computer and call somebody up. Maybe in Skype, you might say, I'm going to connect to a relative on Skype or something like that. But people don't think of, I think as consumers, they think of the commercial applications. And that's where a lot of these soft phones settled in, is contact center agents, unified communication, conferencing, collaboration type applications.
Yeah, absolutely. Like integrated, bundles, and yeah, exactly. It just basically became a feature in terms of a larger product, which is kind of what it should be, frankly.
Right. So WebEx conference calls, these kinds of things, that's much more prevalent today. I got to believe that well more than 60, 70% of the people join a conference call today do through their PC, and then that's today.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a good segue for the next iteration of that technological.
Yeah, and one of the challenges with the soft clients was you had to install them, right? So if you were an occasional user and you were going to join a conference call, and the first thing it used to do, if you remember right, was to throw up this thing, I got to do this plug-in, or I got to install this client on your PC. And I don't know how many WebEx calls started 15 minutes late because people are still putting plugins and installing the software. That had changed sometime mysteriously over the last 24 hours. It made it very, very difficult for people to effectively kind of push through. And so along comes this whole concept of communications enabling web browsers.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I think that was always the holy grail for anybody that was interested in the client side of that world. It was, how do we get rid of the third-party software and the pop-ups and the mandatory software downloads. That was always kind of like the end game. But it took a lot longer than anybody was expecting it to take. Oh, man. I mean, I remember back in 2011, I was with a friend of mine at IETF 86 in Prague, where the very first, WebRTC Birds of a Feather meeting happens. So it was, since from then till now, it's been, 8 years. And, only, in the last couple of years did Apple decide to get on the bandwagon. So it's taken a lot longer than anybody was expecting.
Yeah. Let's skip back just for a quick second. So you threw a new term out probably for some people, WebRTC. And I think it's important to make sure everybody understands, what does that mean and where does it fit?
Yeah, well, I think that, again, WebRTC is a part of the stack, right? It's a part of the client-side software stack.
So the browser.
Well, yeah, but I think something that everybody expected but didn't expect it to happen in the way that it did is that a lot of the WebRTC components that were meant to go into a browser ended up going into, mobile applications first, right? Most of the video chat / voice chat applications, the mobile applications, were all using the WebRTC stack wrapped for mobile. And that almost seemed to happen faster than, the integrated browser experience. So the whole, impetus behind WebRTC is, it's half web and it's half real-time communications. Mm-hmm. And the whole idea here was so that people could get in front of their browser and, go to a web page that enabled some form of real-time communications, be it voice, video, or messaging, and or, all of the above, and have a seamless experience regardless of what browser it was, what operating system it was. And that was the driving, force behind, or that was the driving, MO.
Vision or dream.
Yeah, behind the whole movement. So, 5 years went by, 6 years went by, 7 years went by. It took a lot longer than anybody was expecting. And I think it's because, I'm almost certain that it's because there's a great deal of politics involved. There's also a great deal of, land ownership that you have to overcome, right? There were the major browser owners and there were the mobile, it was basically, desktop was dying and mobile was growing like crazy. So you had to accommodate the requests of various groups in order to, get their buy-in. And, so it's taken a lot longer, but it certainly has become, I think the most prolific method for enabling, voice and video in a real-time way and across the globe now. Once the rubber met the road, it seemed to take off, pretty fast.
Yeah. Well, there were, and of course I was there alongside you and others,
Yeah, sure.
going through these bumps in the road. But I think that, the original vision was very clear. It was to voice and video enable browsers in a consistent way, so that as an application developer, irrespective of the browser or the mobile platform for that matter, you could create a communications application, whether it be, let's say, conferencing or contact center or just regular consumer real-time communications, that they didn't need to do all these plugins. It didn't need to do load the specialized software. It was just hidden underneath the covers of either the browser or the application that they had on their computer. And there was a lot of pushback from some of the browser vendors early as to which way to solve this problem. And specifically, Apple really was a real party pooper in the sense of just was very resistant to making these changes because they had a tune of their own that they were trying to follow. And
well, that's just it. I'm not sure if it was just a timing thing. I think for some of these guys, it was just a matter of where they were in their go-to-market strategy for their various products and features that they were rolling out, and open sourcing or providing open access to that tooling before they had an opportunity to bring their own stuff to market was kind of counterintuitive. Right. So totally understand why it took so long. It's just kind of sad that it had to take so long.
Right. But nonetheless, we're at the point now today where many of the applications that people probably use every day are probably powered by WebRTC. And you could maybe just give a couple examples.
Oh, yeah. Pick one. I would suspect that I'm not sure what the product we're using here, but pick an online conferencing service, and it would definitely be, well, not definitely, but the likelihood that any kind of a conferencing platform that you're going to on the web where you don't have to install any software, it's most certainly being powered by WebRTC.
And so, the cue is that when you first open the page, if your browser asks you if it's okay to use the microphone, that's a dead giveaway.
Yeah, exactly. The largest, web conferencing platforms are all powered by WebRTC at some level, Hangouts and, WebEx and, take your pick. They're pretty much all powered by WebRTC at some level.
Right. Yeah, no, that's significantly changed the way people communicate. And of course, that's opened up now is all these, not only the conferencing platforms, because they were an easy use case, right? And conferencing has always been a very high value application, but it goes beyond that to unified communications, and unified communications as a service. It has been a relatively recent emerging application, and we're seeing big players like Amazon and others come out with pure cloud-based contact center applications, et cetera. That a lot of the plumbing underneath the cover for a lot of those is WebRTC based. So it kind of brings us to this new era of cloud-based communications, and I'm kind of wondering, where do you see it going from here? Is this move to the cloud just the tip of the iceberg, and what's happening and how's that coming together?
Yeah, I think it is. I think the cloud-based communications is just another kind of step in the direction of a completely not decentralized, but I think a deconstructed way of being able to consume things in an ad hoc fashion that's very easy for not only just developers but business owners to be able to take advantage of this technology. Mm-hmm. So in the old days, I used to build things on a Windows NT computer and stick cards in it and try and drive service by building more and more of these things, and then interconnecting them with some form of backhaul. But now it's like, well, we can use things like Docker, and we can use things like Kubernetes, and we can use containers, like those types of architecture, types of architectures kind of leverage to deliver a much more robust offering in a very ad hoc fashion. So now, like, we're starting to see, communication platform providers put together offerings that allow, developers and business owners to build service that they can see value in a piecemeal way and only pay for what they use. Right. So it's becoming very consumable, and I think that's been the challenge, is to get this very complex technology in front of business owners in a way that they can consume. And I think that's the ultimate goal, is to, because once you've enabled the businesses to, make the most use of these technologies, the consumers will, just be a cog in the wheel, right? Like they'll just be using the technology because that's what the businesses are providing. But, and in the same way that, consumers and users kind of, communicate with each other, they don't generally do that with, odd, esoteric open source software, right? You don't see users communicating using some weird WebRTC interface that, didn't have any thoughtful UI or UX put into it, or any kind of, go-to-market strategy behind it. It's all using FaceTime. It's all using, Android message now, or Android messages, or whatever the heck they're calling it now. So, I mean, like, these technologies are all enabled by businesses, and consumers just kind of use them. And I think that the more the technology is made available to businesses that aren't, billion-dollar multinationals, but, businesses that can actually make use of that technology in a way that adds value without, making their head hurt, I think is kind of like the ultimate goal. I think we're almost there. There's a lot of shops, including the one I'm working for now, who are getting really close to that. But, we still have a ways to go. I think I've seen some of the object designers are okay in terms of creating workflow for voice and video, but they're not fantastic. And the average business owner, is still kind of, having to watch video tutorials on how to use those things in order to get the most out of them. And I think to get past that, is kind of like where we need to be. But we'll get there.
Matter of fact, I did want to zero in on what you're doing today, and I know in October you started a new gig. You want to tell us a little bit about what you're going to be doing?
Yeah. It was I think September that I kind of started over there. But I mean, SignalWire is founded by the same group that created FreeSwitch. FreeSwitch is a prolific open source communications product. It's been around since as long as I've been in the industry, almost. It's I think it's been around for about 12 years, which is right about the same time I created my first conferencing product, and I was using FreeSwitch at the time, and that's how I became familiar with it. And Anthony Menesali over there, who's the founder and kind of like the main author of FreeSwitch, is the CEO of SignalWire, and it's essentially a culmination of all of those years and all of that experience in building very robust enterprise class voice over IP switches and IP communications infrastructure that has led to the creation of SignalWire. And from my perspective, it's like a deconstructed SignalWire is essentially like a deconstructed FreeSwitch that has been reformulated inside a containerized kind of cloud offering so that you can, like I was making a reference to earlier, you can, consume the various products in a piecemeal way. So you can, take voice or video or messaging in the way that you need it and only pay for what you use versus, having to commit to monthly minimums or what have you. So I think that the way the company has been constructed has been very disruptive in the way that the services are being offered, but also from a pricing perspective. The idea here is not to make, I think if you heard it from the founders, they would tell you that the idea here is not to build this company on the backs of the people that need access to legacy services like, PSTN access or SMS, because we believe that those will all be commoditized eventually. So the idea here is to build value in the platform and the technology that goes into the platform and how we make those services available over and above the legacy stuff. So that's SignalWire in a nutshell. And I think that it has a super bright future. And I think that you're going to be hearing a lot more about the products that are coming out of that, out of SignalWire side of the world for sure.
Good. Well, I'm looking forward to learning more about what SignalWire is up to. I got a couple of, I spent some time with Anthony and the gang at some of the conferences earlier this year, got exposed to it. Obviously, big splash at Enterprise Connect and some of the other events, and there's more coming. I'll be at ClueCon. Hopefully, you'll be there too.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll see you there. Good to see you.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So, sounds like a lot has happened from those early ham radio days to disruptive cloud-based communication platforms. Has been quite a journey, and I think it earns you a badge as a telecom disruptor. So, congratulations.
Well, thanks, Al. I mean, I think I could probably say the same for you. You're pretty much there at every turn. So it's interesting having this conversation with you because I can remember spending time with you long ago.
Oh yeah.
So things have come full circle.
Yeah, it sure has. It's been great sharing it with you. So with it, Erik, I'm going to say thanks so much for sharing your thoughts today. And we look forward to this summer when we get a chance to cross paths. So thanks again for joining me.
Awesome. Thanks, Alan. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay. This episode is sponsored by Telco Bridges, makers of the free SBC session border controller software and high-performance media and signaling gateways. For more on Telco Bridges, visit telcobridges.com. If you'd like to share your thoughts or like to nominate someone as a telecom disruptor, please feel free to reach out via Twitter at Telco Bridges. There's more content on blog.telcobridges.com. Be sure to subscribe, ensuring you don't miss any of the latest news and updates. With that, I'd like to thank both Erik and you, our listeners, and look forward to having you join us on another episode.